Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing really well. And very excited to have you back here with our guest today, Nick Wignall. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Daniel. Glad to be here.
So, do let us know, let the our audience know. I think a lot of people actually know you because you've been a guest before, but do tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work primarily as a therapist, and I specialize in anxiety disorders and insomnia. So that's kind of my day job, working with people. And then I also blog a lot. So I have a personal blog, and I write about all sorts of topics in kind of personal growth, self-improvement, that sort of thing. Everything from confidence and anxiety, productivity, emotional intelligence, sleep, all sorts of stuff. And I do the occasional podcast now and then too. So that's kind of what I'm up to.
That's awesome. And I shared this with you, Nick, but for anybody else that's tuning in there, 3 times on my channel, there's been somebody who said, "Oh, I read this thing," and then I'm like, "Oh, this is really smart." And then who read this? Oh, it was Nick. Like literally 3 times that happened. It's like there, which actually I think goes to show that there aren't that many people out there who write really good, like insightful things about insomnia, right?
Yeah, it's wild how few there's so much low hanging fruit.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, super excited having you here. And I want to start with this email that I got a day ago. And there's a little bit of a backstory. And uh, 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 listen, Nick, I had this kind of question for you, and it's a little bit complicated how I'm going to get to the actual question. So just pay attention, but we'll get there in a second. So the backstory is that I had a podcast guest. His name is Alex, who had this, like, as he was falling asleep, he had this kind of sudden awareness, and that was very disruptive to him. But he did figure out after listening to my videos that if he kind of didn't do anything about it, he would fall asleep. He found that was helpful. And then there was another person that came in, Linda, and she shared that she had done exactly that and she was doing really, really well. But she worded it as if, like, she said, I realized that by not doing anything, I'm just allowing this kind of biological function of sleep just to happen. And then after that, 22 hours ago, we have this email from Alex that I'm going to read. Good morning. I was super happy to see you did an Insomnia Insight on the sudden awareness. My quick question here is, can you confirm that what she said about how to biologically getting past that sudden awareness is accurate? I feel like it is, but I'm not sure, and I would really appreciate your quick help that by trying to solve the sudden awareness, we're not trying to stop it, allows you physically get past the awareness when it happens to further transition into sleep. Now here comes the kind of twist here. I think, as you've shared, with panic attacks, it's often kind of the safety behavior that kind of keeps you from getting past it. So share with us, like, with your knowledge about panic attacks, can you talk a little bit about that and then apply that to this question?
How so if I understand the question correctly, it seems like in both a problem with both anxiety and panic attacks, but then also insomnia is reading too much into otherwise innocuous physical processes in your body. And then as a result, that interferes with a different, healthier, natural process in your body. So in the case of insomnia, if you experience like a sudden awareness or even like a myoclonic jerk, it's like a common thing when people fall asleep. A lot of people don't know that it's really common and that it doesn't really mean anything. Like, it's pretty normal. It's not significant of anything. And so the problem people get into, though, and it's the same with anxiety, like you feel kind of a heart flutter, right, or something, or a strange pain, in your leg, and then you start worrying about it, and that leads to more and more anxiety, maybe even panic. I think the key insight is being able to figure out what is actually worthy of more thinking and attention, and what isn't. Because if you do start, even if you're not explicitly worrying or freaking out about one of these like sudden awarenesses, if you start asking yourself, well, what does this mean? Like, where does this come from? What should I do about this? You're telling your brain to wake up, right? To go into problem solving mode. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. We use problem solving mode all the time in our regular life, and it's really helpful. It just interferes with sleep. Your body wants to fall asleep. You've got sleep drive built up. And so if you do make the decision to try and make sense of something, whether it's how your body feels or this sudden awareness or something like that, you're just, it's going to interfere a little bit with your body's natural ability and desire to fall asleep, which doesn't mean you're not going to fall asleep. It just means it's going to take you a little bit longer because you've hit the arousal button a little bit. So I don't know. That's kind of how I think about the comparison between those two things. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. A great answer, by the way. Super clear. And let me have a follow-up question for you. Because I've started becoming really interested in panic attacks. I know you know a lot about this. And correct me if this is wrong, but I feel like from what I've started to understand about it is that it's kind of the attempt to keep yourself from having a panic attack that in the end actually ultimately leads to you not getting past them. Is that true?
Yes. The thing that causes and maintains panic is the unwillingness to have anxiety. So we all experience anxiety. We all experience, for a variety of reasons, all sorts of things can trigger our brain's threat detection system, which is you've got a little mechanism built in your brain for very good survival reasons that if it thinks something's dangerous, it's going to shoot you up with a little bit of adrenaline, right? And other kind of stress hormones. But you feel that, and that adrenaline can lead to some kind of funky physical symptoms, like a heart rate. Your heart rate goes up, right? Or you notice kind of a heart flutter, right? For instance, or you get a little lightheaded, right? You feel a little lightheaded, or your body temperature raises a little bit, so you get kind of sweaty. Now, all these things, if you were being chased by a bear, they would all be happening to you. You just wouldn't notice them. You wouldn't think about them, right? Or if you're, scoring a touchdown in the last 2 minutes of a game, like you're pumped up. You're not even thinking about that stuff. The trick with anxiety is we experience these fight or flight symptoms in a context where it's not really appropriate, and so we pay a lot of attention to them, right? So the trick though is to realize these things it's your body doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like it's not, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just confused about what's actually dangerous or not. The thing is, if you take those sensations and you say, this is a problem, we've got to get rid of them, right? Either by running away or fixing them or figuring them out. You can think about all of that as unwillingness. You're unwilling to have your anxiety. You're trying to make it go away or run away from it. And in either case, what you're teaching your brain is this is bad. Like anxiety is dangerous, which means even if you temporarily feel a little bit better, you think, oh my God, my heart's racing. I feel kind of lightheaded. I'm so agitated. I just can't stand this. I'm going to pop a Xanax. Well, you might feel better temporarily, but what you're teaching your brain is the next time something makes you a little bit anxious, like anxiety is dangerous. So it's going to shoot you up with even more adrenaline,
right?
Which is going to make you more likely to want to run away or get rid of it. So willingness is the key word, I think, when it comes to both panic and anxiety, but also insomnia. You have to be willing to experience this thing that is very uncomfortable, maybe even painful, but fundamentally not dangerous. So that's the key concept, I think, is willingness.
Such clarity. It's so nice to just listen to this, Nick. You explained so well, and then my thinking as I'm hearing this is when it comes to going back to this kind of sudden awareness of falling asleep is, again, if you're not kind of willing to experience that, in your words, or if you're trying to fix it, trying to stop it, then you're ultimately going to have more of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if in the short term, it kind of it makes you feel better to think more about it and try and understand it or do something about it. In the long term, the next night, the night after that, you're making yourself kind of hypervigilant to it.
Yes.
Because what you're telling your brain is this thing is dangerous, or it's a problem. It's something we need to figure out and understand. So your brain's going to be on the lookout for it the next time. So it creates this self-fulfilling prophecy.
100%. So cool. Alex, just to you, I think I answered you privately, Alex, but I think the quick answer was yes. Like what Linda said is true. It's a kind of biological function. If you don't interfere with it, you will sleep. Cool. So let's move over to our next email, which is a little bit longer one that we'll go through. This is from Adrian, came in 2 days ago. Hi, Daniel. I'm a 23-year-old male from Europe. I've stumbled upon your YouTube videos regarding insomnia, and I'm contacting you because I'm basically at my wits' end, and I'm seeking advice from a professional. And by the way, actually, there a little bit of disclaimer here, which and nothing here is medical advice, professional advice to anyone. Just me and Nick kind of sharing general thoughts that apply to anyone that has similar problems to the one writing here. So that said, around a month and a half ago, I've started to gradually develop insomnia. Sleep suddenly stopped being refreshing. For example, I was going to sleep around 11 p.m. and waking up around 2 or 3 a.m., then taking an hour or two to fall back asleep for an hour or so. It's becoming gradually worse. I haven't had a good night of sleep that would be refreshing and without interruptions since before Christmas 2019. I've also developed chills that last through every day on 30th of December, and I've been generally in a bad place since then. I have low libido, low to no appetite, I'm drowsy, I'm tired, I feel no energy. I've taken hydroxyzine, doxylamine, I even took Xanax for 3 nights in a row, unfortunately to no avail. I'm currently sleeping 2 to 3 hours each night with vivid dreams, interruptions, and I'm miserable. I've obviously started Googling the symptoms, and I've stumbled across something called sporadic fatal insomnia, which terrified me to my very core because the symptoms match exactly my case. I've tried confronting it and consulted doctors, psychiatrists, neurologists about it, but they only say that it's rather impossible for me to have it because it's extremely rare. They've ordered me to take a sleep test and do an MRI, but I know for a fact that's not how you diagnose this. If I'm just scared, to be honest, that I'm going to die from it. Would you have any piece of advice what to do? Is my case normal? What should I do next? I'm also a hypochondriac, so I constantly worry over what's going on, but I've used to worry over the past. My sleep was never affected in such a way. It's truly the first time that I'm dealing with something like this, and I feel hopeless. So a lot of information there, but Nick, what are your reactions?
Well, yeah, the first thing is it's complex. It seems like there's a lot going on. So I would I would defer to you, Daniel, as the MD in a sense of wanting to rule out anything physiological, because there's the symptoms like chills all day long. That's more unusual. I don't know if he actually got a sleep study or not, but if you feel like you're sleeping a decent amount but still super tired and don't feel like you're getting rest, I mean, apnea would always be something I'd be interested in. I'm not familiar with the sporadic fatal insomnia. I've actually never heard of that before. So do you know about this, Daniel? Have you heard of this?
I can comment on this a little bit and then we can go further. So it's actually very common that I get that question, Nick. It's an extremely rare condition that has affected like 30 people in the history of mankind that are known, but it's this kind of like mad cow disease. And it should never have been called an insomnia, in my opinion. It's kind of a neurodegenerative disease, but people that have it kind of stop sleeping, etc. So that's what he's worried about.
Yeah. So given that that's probably extremely unlikely, then the other thing too is how he feels during the day. It's very possible there's some depression going on there. So you might want to have see someone about that and get kind of an evaluation for whether there's some depression playing a role there. But even if there is, most of the guidelines say if you have comorbid depression and insomnia, you should still work on the insomnia even first, because it often helps so much with depression. So if we kind of narrow this down to, if there's a good chance this actually is insomnia and not something else, some other medical condition, some other sleep issue, some other psychiatric issue like depression, And then if you look at kind of the combination of, in his words, being kind of a hypochondriac and having anxiety in other areas of his life, but not with sleep necessarily, but then all of a sudden having this problem where he's waking up 2 to 3 hours after going to bed and having a hard time going back to sleep, that sounds a lot like pretty run-of-the-mill insomnia, and what I would kind of explain to people is it's pretty normal to wake up about 3 hours after you initially fall asleep, because you've been through 2 sleep cycles and you've gone through the vast majority of your deep sleep at that point. So it's not uncommon to wake up in the middle of the night. But it's very easy if you do wake up, especially if you have a history of anxiety, to start worrying about the fact that you woke up. In other words, to think of it as abnormal or that it means something's wrong, which then makes it way less likely that you're going to fall back asleep quickly. And then that happens a few nights in a row, and pretty soon you're convinced you have insomnia, and now you're really freaked out about sleep, which just makes the whole thing way, way worse. So in cases like this, I really try to do some strong psychoeducation about the idea that it's very normal to wake up in the middle of the night. Typically, you go back to sleep within a few minutes, but even if you don't, even if you're up for an hour, it's not the end of the world. You may not feel super great, but getting really concerned and anxious about the fact that you're waking up in the middle of the night or you're not falling right back to sleep instantly is only making the problem worse. And then the other thing you can do too is if you really are having a lot of trouble waking up in the middle of the night, you might want to try what's called time in bed restriction, where if I don't think he mentioned when he was getting out of bed in the morning, but if he's going to bed at 11, a lot of people I see like this, they're typically spending 8, even 9 hours in bed trying to make up for the fact that they, missed an hour or two in the middle of the night, which is intuitive. I mean, it makes sense in a lot of ways. It's totally the wrong approach though, because what you're doing is you're killing your sleep drive and making it more likely that you're going to wake up in the middle of the night the next night. So what you actually want to do is, if he's going to bed at 11, I might recommend something like, set an alarm for 6, 5, even if you want to be a little more aggressive with it. And just no matter how much you sleep or don't sleep, get up at 5 or 6. And what that's going to do is you're going to feel really groggy and sleepy, but you're going to have accumulated even more sleep drive the following night, which means the way to think about this is your body has to do more work to get you rested. And the harder your body has to work at night to sleep, the less likely you are to wake up in the middle of the night. So I think that could really help iron out that problem of waking up a few hours after you go to bed. And even if you do, you'll be even more sleepy. So your odds of falling back asleep relatively quickly will go up. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope that kind of gets at it. What do you think, Daniel?
Very good. And I agree with you. Like I said in kind of my disclaimer, whenever you're concerned about your health, talk to your doctor, of course. Sure. That said, I agree. Like really having, interact with a lot of people over the YouTube channel and clinic, etc. There's nothing here that I find is really, really jumps out at me, to be honest. I think this could be all, anxiety, depression driven. And I agree. I think honestly, for anyone that has trouble sleeping, really for any reason, whatever it is that is driving it, there's no reason not to try spending less time in bed, exactly as you said, Nick. So I say to everyone, and by the way, since you said like set it and forget it, I say that all the time. I like set it and forget it. Like spend 6 hours in bed or something like that, and then like shift your attention elsewhere. And I think that's what really everybody should try in the beginning.
Yeah, and with one little caveat on that too is not a caveat, but something that can help, because that can be hard. I mean, when you're already feel like you're not sleeping very well, to get out of bed early, it can be really tough. What you want to try and remind yourself is, yes, in the moment this doesn't feel good, but this is really to my advantage in the long term, because it means my sleep drive is going to be higher and I'm more likely to sleep well the following night. But if you sleep in and you kind of toss and turn and you don't get a chance to build up as much sleep drive, even if it maybe feels better in the short term. So it's really are you playing short-term games or long-term games? And when it comes to insomnia and sleep, you really want to start playing long-term games, not short-term games.
100%. And one kind of additional question too, I find, and I say often on my channel, that like hyperarousal can cause, or maybe not cause, but maybe make you pay attention to all kinds of weird things, like the kind of little twitch, little sensation, tingling. You find that as well?
Yeah, totally. Right. I mean, that's super, super common. And it's important to acknowledge, like, those things are they're normal. And most of the time they're probably happening, but you're probably just not aware of them. But when you get into a hyperarousal or kind of anxiety state, you start noticing all these things that you wouldn't have noticed beforehand.
Perfect. Let's say to Adrian here, I hope this helped, and stay in touch. And please, if you're listening to this, Adrian, stay on when I read this next email, because it was just like the timing was so opportune, I felt, because I got another email from, where is it? No, I can't find it. There's Lindsay. Okay, here it is. And this is from someone named Gabriel, who like 7 months ago actually came on as a podcast guest. He was super worried that he had this sporadic fatal insomnia, But listen to his email now. Hi, Daniel. It's been a while, huh? I remember way back when I was one of those people who was scared of SFI after actually getting some tests, including a sleep study, blood test, MRI, EMG, and well, just having it for 8 months without really dying, honestly, I just realized, I still realized like I don't have SFI at all. I've been sleeping actually pretty well until recently, so you could have said I relapsed, but this time around I actually have more reasonable and sensical questions. What does one do about depression, anxiety, perpetuated insomnia so it doesn't get to the point of being afraid of something stupid like SFI, like I did, and hopefully so it hasn't happened again? In my case, I went through a breakup, two in fact. Despite coming out the other side alive, the loss of that connection really puts a major stress on me. So for Adrian, listen to Gabriel. He had this concern, but turns out that was not what it was, and he's sleeping pretty well. So that's number one. Number two, we're back here. Nick's computer crashed, but he's back on his phone. All right. I think I'll just take it. So I'll just summarize this actually. I was reading an email from Gabriel, who had just like Adrian, like in the past, Gabriel was afraid that he had this rare condition called sporadic fatal insomnia. Turns out, 8 months later, he realized he doesn't. But his question now was, he had a breakup. He's kind of feeling like a little bit anxious, depressed, etc. And I think his question is, how do you kind of prevent that from becoming really bad insomnia that he had in the past? What are your thoughts on that? Anything you can do kind of preventively to keep yourself from getting really bad insomnia?
This is going to sound cheeky, but I think it really is true. You have to be willing to have insomnia again. Like if you really want to not have insomnia, you have to be willing and okay with the idea that you might not have great sleep, especially if you're having like a major event in your life. Big things like breakups or job loss or divorce, or like it's normal not to sleep very well after things like this. It's very normal. And that I always like to tell people, your sleep system is dynamic by design. It's supposed to be flexible and adaptable. Like we probably wouldn't have survived as a species if we had to get 8 hours of sleep every single night, or else we stopped functioning. Like that would be a terrible way to design an effective species. So again, I don't want to come across as sarcastic with this, but I really mean it, that you have to be willing to have or less than ideal sleep. Because if you're so kind of convinced and like tightly wound up about the idea that I have to keep getting good sleep, that in itself is going to cause you to get poor sleep. And so whatever the kind of habits and ideas that helped you work through insomnia the first time, those are probably still effective. Those are probably things you just want to, maybe refresh yourself on and adhere to. You can do a little bit of time in bed restriction, if you feel like you're getting up a lot in the middle of the night, or, you can just go to bed a little bit later, make sure you're really, really sleepy before you actually get in bed. But the biggest thing I think to keep in mind is it's just this attitude that, like, to some extent, it's going to be normal that maybe your sleep isn't as great as you would like it to be. And that's, it's unfortunate to some degree. It'd be nice if we could all sleep amazingly all the time, but it's just not realistic, I think. And so stick to your basic principles that kind of got you through insomnia the first time, and then try to have kind of a gentle approach to yourself with and around sleep. I think that's actually the best sort of advice I would give someone in that position.
Perfect. You worded it in a really good way, and I think I'm gonna tag along to that. My thoughts, which are basically saying the same thing, but maybe in a different way, which is not. I think the important thing is not to start like looking for things like, oh, I'm gonna try this melatonin now. I'm gonna try doing this. I'm gonna try not change anything. And I think one thing that Gabriel has working in his favor here is he knows exactly why he has trouble sleeping, and that will keep him from going to like, why am I not sleeping? What's going on? So exactly, same thing.
Yeah. don't become a sleep tinkerer.
Right.
I see this a
Exactly.
lot. People always kind of tinkering or playing around with little sleep hygiene techniques and strategies, and it's the set it and forget it. There's a few important things, and kind of stick to those, and be gentle on yourself, and you'll get through it. It'll be all right.
100%. And now that you mentioned that sleep tinkering, what are your thoughts on trackers, sleep trackers?
Um, I would say I'm generally not a fan. I'm not like super opposed. Like if people come in and they're using a sleep tracker, I kind of keep an eye on it, because it's very easy for people to get obsessive and anxious as a result of sleep trackers. It's basically how I treat any other sleep hygiene thing. If someone comes in and they tell me like, oh, I always drink my sleepy time tea before bed, or I got these new blackout shades, or I'm not going to tell them not to use them. But what I am going to do is monitor what's their attitude towards them. So if people are like obsessively checking their sleep trackers and kind of live or die by what their sleep trackers tell them, then it's time for a conversation about sleep trackers, and how effective they are, what they're actually measuring, to what extent it's really helpful to know that you got 33% deep sleep according to something on your wrist. Like how what are the upsides versus the downsides of considering information like that.
100%.
So I'm not completely opposed to them, but I'm sort of skeptical. I think it generally falls into the category of people paying too much attention to stuff that isn't actually all that important for sleep, but has some major side effects. And so I think more often than not, it's less than helpful.
That's good. I think your approach sounds very sound. I think I've lately become very alarmist. I've gotten this idea that people that track their sleep are, kind of health conscious, like, a little bit of risk for insomnia, and they track it and they try to tinker, etc. So
Yeah.
anyway, we'll move along to actually our last email for today, which came in here 2 days ago. This is from Avery. Hi, Daniel. I started having issues with insomnia last year after getting in a bad routine. It started to snowball for the past few months. I believe I started suffering from paradoxical insomnia because it never felt like I was getting knocked out. And when I opened my eyes in the morning, I never felt refreshed or like I had fallen asleep at all. The situation has gotten worse, and at times it actually feels like my mind has forgotten how to fall asleep at all, as I've gone days being up at a time. I'm not sure if a sleep study would help or if I would even be able to fall asleep for it. I've also tried so many different medications, so I've pretty much given up on those. What do you believe would be the best step going forward? Sincerely, Avery. Thoughts on that?
Whew. Okay, there's a lot there. Yeah, it's tough to say. It's hard without kind of more background information. Yeah, I mean, I think if she hasn't, like, I always recommend that people rule out physiological stuff. Like it could be apnea, which is, can definitely lead to that feeling like you're not getting enough sleep, even if you are actually sleeping, not feeling rested. The thing, I mean, one thing that kind of, puts up my spidey senses is the idea that I'm going days at a time without sleeping. I what I usually find when people think that they're going days at a time without sleeping is that they are actually sleeping more than they think they are, but they're maybe spending a lot of time in lighter stages of sleep, which we know that in general, when people are in very light stages of sleep and you wake them up, they will tell you they weren't sleeping. I mean, it's a very common phenomena. So you probably are getting more sleep than you think you are, which I think is important to acknowledge. People don't really function all that well if they're getting 3 or 4 days without literally any sort of sleep. So that's something to be aware of. Yeah, I don't honestly, without more detail and given the extent of what's going on, I think I'd probably work with someone who does CBTI who can kind of get a better sense for the whole kind of case. And because there could be all sorts of stuff going on here. There could be problematic habits. Like, I don't know what's the sleep schedule like? Are you spending 12 hours in bed? In which case, time in bed restriction might be important. Is there tons of anxiety around sleep and whether you're going to sleep or not, and the effects of poor sleep? That's a whole nother thing. And you might want to kind of take a more anxiety-based approach to it. So it really sort of depends. I don't know if I have a one kind of first tip other than at least if you're in an area where you can work with someone who does CBTI, I think that's probably the most efficient way to get after this.
Always, 100%. I think totally. There's a lot we don't know here, but I wanted to like maybe talk about some phrases and things that I thought may be helpful. And by the way, one thing to add from my perspective as a sleep doctor is that a lot of people look at sleep testing as kind of a general, very conclusive and important test to do when you have trouble sleeping, which it really isn't. It's really all about checking if you have sleep apnea or not. And again, like I say to everyone, like you have to talk to your doctor, but if somebody's like not snoring loudly and are very anxious about sleep and have that, then it very rarely does a sleep study actually add value to that. But there were a couple of things that I thought were worth talking about. Like one was this, like, I feel like I never feel like I was getting knocked out. And, when I hear that, I'm thinking like maybe there's some kind of unrealistic expectations or things like that nobody of us, nobody really gets knocked out. And also, I feel a lot of people express that I can't shut off my brain. And that kind of implies, I feel like, that they believe that other people can do that. Mm-hmm. So do you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. I'm a great sleeper, and I never feel like I get knocked out.
Right. Exactly.
I periodically wake up in the middle of the night. Some nights I sleep really well. Some nights I sleep kind of okay. Sometimes it takes me 3 minutes to fall asleep. Sometimes it takes me half an hour to fall asleep. All of that is pretty normal. Sometimes I wake up, occasionally I wake up feeling amazing, like I have tons of energy. Most of the time I wake up, fairly groggy, kind of like, it takes me 15, 20 minutes to kind of get going. Sometimes I just have a pretty bad night of sleep and I just feel a little off for the whole day. But I think what makes me a good sleeper and not an insomniac is I don't worry about it all that much, one way or the other. Like I know all of that is pretty normal. And I trust that on average, my body's going to do what it needs to do and give me the amount of sleep I need. So I think it's a big kind of mindset, how you think about sleep kind of issue.
Absolutely. And you bring up two important points, I feel, is like how, one is, I think, to judge whether you're sleeping enough in terms of like, just the quantity, is like you said, if you don't sleep at all for just 1 or 2 days, you will be so sleepy that you will fall asleep during the day. You won't. So if somebody, like in your case, Avery, if you are awake during the day, you're alert, you're able to think and function, that signals that you're probably not that sleep deprived. That's kind of point number one. Point number two is people often judge how well they slept by how they feel during the day, meaning somebody says, I kind of don't feel refreshed, I feel fatigued, I don't have energy. That doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't sleep enough or didn't sleep well, right? And because that can be really tricky when people, again, start tinkering and say, like, I don't sleep, I don't feel refreshed, I have to work on my sleep. That often leads to like more attention to sleep, more tinkering, worse sleep overall. So that's another thing I thought that was important, right?
Yeah, I often with clients who have fatigue as their major complaint when it comes to sleep and insomnia, sometimes I'll get pretty hard line and we will just stop talking about sleep entirely for a few sessions and we'll focus on other things that affect fatigue besides sleep. Because sure, getting sleep is one of the best ways to not feel fatigued, but there's a lot of other things that affect fatigue. How you eat, how much exercise you're getting, what you're doing throughout your day. Are you spending your day doing interesting, meaningful, productive things, or are you chronically kind of like bored and underwhelmed with your life? Are you depressed? Are you like, there's just a lot of things. Do you have other major stressors in your life that are going on? So by doing that and by making small improvements in any of those areas, what it does is it shows people, instead of me just telling them, it shows them that their fatigue is probably related to a bunch of other things in addition to their sleep.
100%.
Which then has the really beneficial knock-on effect of not putting so much pressure on getting perfect sleep in order to feel good, which I think is huge.
So important. Super important. And then I'll just add on, like, it's a very common many people feel like they've forgotten how to sleep, like they lost ability. And I think I've talked a lot about that before. So I'm just going to add that you cannot lose the ability to sleep, but you can lose confidence in your ability to sleep, which is really what insomnia is all about. So just kind of reassurance that you cannot lose the ability to sleep. And I think one more thing to add here, which probably will be maybe the last thing here, but I've tried so many different medications and I've given up on those. And this is just, I think, in a few months. And I think first time I spoke to you, actually, you brought up the concept of sleep efforts. So I can bring it up here and you can comment on it. But I feel like anything you do with a specific purpose of trying to sleep more often leads to kind of just the opposite. You just pay more attention, you self-monitor, and then so it's not surprising at all that somebody tries a sleep medication and it doesn't quote unquote work. That does not mean that there's something wrong with you, and it's like it's completely expected that it wouldn't do anything because nothing can actually make you sleep. So Avery, so I'll ask you to comment in a second here, Nick, if you'd like to. But to Avery here, I honestly think, like I say to everyone else, it doesn't hurt to spend less time in bed. It doesn't hurt at all to start saying, I'm going to get up 6 every morning. I'm going to go to bed at 11, and then just keep going with that. And I bet you'll start feeling better pretty soon here. And I have a little question,
Sure.
Nick, which was, I thought about this for a while. A lot of, I correct me if I'm wrong here, but sometimes I think of anxiety and depression are almost the opposite, meaning like anxious is like you're trying to survive. You're thinking of like your survival mode, thinking about threats, etc. You're kind of hyper, right? And you often have trouble sleeping. Depressed, you've almost given up, like you're not trying anymore. You are often sleeping a lot, and etc. I think of them as kind of opposites, but why is it that so many of us have both?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I think we're still trying to understand it, especially depression is just a really poorly defined disorder. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if in 50 or 100 years, people in our healthcare providers in our position are like laughing hilariously that we have this one thing called depression and that we lumped all these different things that they now know are distinct sort of phenomena together under one thing, but that being said, one very striking kind of common factor between anxiety and depression and insomnia actually is what's called emotional reasoning, which is the idea that you make decisions based on how you feel as opposed to what you think is right or what your values are, right? So someone with anxiety, a friend calls up and says, hey, let's go to this party. And at the last minute they say, I can't go, but you should still go. And you start getting anxious because you're like, well, I don't know many people there. Like, what if people think I'm awkward? Maybe I should just not go. You're basing your decision on how you feel in the moment, and not going to the party. You're going to feel better for a second, right? Maybe even for that day, you're going to feel relief. But what you're training your brain to do is think like, I have to act in accordance with how I feel. So the next time I feel bad, I'm going to feel more pulled to avoid, which just ratchets up anxiety. Exactly. So depression is the same thing, but often in a different direction. It's, I feel lethargic. I feel like I don't get much like pleasure or enjoyment out of things. Like I feel like I don't have any motivation. All of which is often true for people with depression. They are anhedonic. They don't feel as much pleasure as they used to. But the key insight is that doesn't mean you can't still do things. And in fact, just as much as feeling good helps us do things that are hard, what people don't or forget is that doing things makes us feel good, right?
Exactly.
So it's in a lot of ways it's the same with insomnia, right? Like I feel like something's wrong because I'm not sleepy right now, right? So I'm gonna try all these different sleep hygiene things, and I'm gonna yell at my brain to shut up and go to sleep. And but that just because you feel like you're not sleepy doesn't mean your body isn't actually wanting to go to sleep, right? Or just because I woke up, my alarm went off, and I know I should get out of bed, but I just feel so sleepy and tired, like I should just snooze for another hour or two. But really, I remember from my session with Daniel that getting up early so that my sleep drive builds up more so that I sleep better the next night is really what's going to help my insomnia in the long run. So this concept of emotional reasoning, being very careful of basing your decisions on how you feel as opposed to your values, like what you know to be true or what you actually want. And I think that underlies a lot of different issues in mental health and like anxiety or depression. Or does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the core, like, to put it in my words, it would be like, judging what you should do based to a large extent on how you feel can take you in both the direction of anxiety and kind of what we call depression.
Sure. Yep. Even though they look very different, the underlying mechanism is often really similar.
Totally. And I have to tag on one more thing here. And if anybody out there who works at my kids' school or after school, I love them. They're really, really good. But what I've noticed, and by the way, I noticed the other day too, and it's like skating class too, is like almost every week, one of the teachers, after school teachers, will kind of pull me aside and say, I noticed, Sam was a little sad today, or like, I noticed Sarah was a little upset. I talked to her, etc. And I'm getting a bit worried here because I feel that as a society, we're paying so much attention to how we feel, and I'm thinking, I think he's fine. I don't think there's anything there, but I feel like there's so much attention now put into how kids feel and how they react. They were crying a little bit, and I'm worried that will kind of down the line, generations later, will create more of what we have so much of, anxiety and depression, etc. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a society, we tend to we tend to make two mistakes. We either get over involved in how we feel, or we are completely dismissive of it. And I think both are just not helpful. Like to me, one of the best metaphors for your emotions and how to think about your emotions they're like lights on your dashboard in your car. So if your low fuel light goes off, right, you're going to feel a little bit of anxiety, right? And because it's telling you something. In this case, it's telling you something kind of useful, which is like, hey, you're kind of running low on gas. Think about getting some gas the next time, right? The light itself is not a problem, even though it causes a little bit of anxiety. It's just a messenger. It's just trying to give you some information. But as we all know, sometimes lights go off in your dashboard and they don't mean anything. Like my car, the stupid check engine light is like fritzing on and off all the time. And my mechanic reassures me it's nothing. It's an older car. Like it does that sometimes. So I think that the correct approach to emotions like sadness, for instance, whether it's your own or like your kids, is be aware of it, be attentive to it. Is it signifying something bigger? You can ask yourself that, but don't assume that because someone's sad, that means they're depressed or they're like on the road to depression. It's very normal to feel sad sometimes. It's very normal to feel anxious. It's very normal not to sleep sometimes, like there's all these things, so yeah, I think the tricky part is riding that line of not getting overly involved with, but also not being dismissive of our emotions. Exactly. And so they're like messengers. They're trying to communicate stuff to us. Sometimes it's meaningful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's something worth deeper consideration, sometimes it's not. But you just kind of have to play it on a case-by-case basis and just, think about it, do your best, and don't get too obsessive one way or the other.
Sounds good. Sounds really good. Nick, thanks so much for coming on. Super nice having you.
Thanks for having me on, Daniel.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Let's talk soon.
All right.